Shalom Aleichem, everyone. Thank you all for coming here. My name is Lincolnwood Trustee Atour, and I am president of the ASA, Assyrian Student Association of Chicago. A little bit about ASA. It is a youth organization that was established in 2014, 2015. And the whole goal of this organization is to promote higher education within the community and support each other within the Chicagoland area and globally. And we like to raise awareness with human rights issues or provide any community events to bring people together, whether it's within our own community in the Assyrian Hub, or we can branch out and let other people know that we are still here, we still exist. So that's what ASA Chicago is all about. If you have other questions, let us know. There's a few board members here and a lot of members here. Thank you for being here. I'm going to introduce Justin, our education director, who will now come up to introduce our guests. So thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. So I'll keep it brief. We're going to have 3 speakers today. We're going to start with Atour Sargon. She's a trustee of Lincolnwood, recently elected. Very proud of her. She's going to talk about the role of local government, kind of just how it functions. I feel like most people don't really know how local government works. So Atour will demystify that for us. And then Ramsin's going to discuss the federal government. That's probably what most of you are more familiar with, but I think you'll still have a lot to learn from what he has to say. And then Ram is going to go last. He's going to be here around 2:30, and he's going to discuss state government. So he's the state senator for the 8th district, and I think most of you are in his district, but we actually have a link at the end of the presentation where you can find out who your representative is. So, but I think he is the representative for most of you, or the senator rather. And then throughout the presentation, we're going to talk about the importance of civic engagement, specifically within the Assyrian community. I think we'll have some examples of how we've really made an impact by getting involved. I know there's this misconception that oh, your vote doesn't really matter, or what's the point of getting involved? But I think at the end of this presentation, you'll come to the realization that that's not the case, and being involved in voting can really make an impact. So with that, I think I'll introduce Atour. Oh, and one more thing, feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'll have a Q&A at the end, but by no means do you have to wait until the end. So with that, I'd like to introduce Atour.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ninwed. Thank you, Justin. And thank you to the ASA for this opportunity. We really enjoy any platform where we can educate the community about what we do and how people can be more involved. And I have the great pleasure of knowing many of you, and some of you are new faces, so please feel free at the end to exchange information and let me know how I can be helpful to you. And as Justin mentioned, we want this to be kind of open-ended, so feel free to ask questions throughout. You don't have to wait to the end. So I'll start a little bit with a biography, and I think it's important. And the first bullet point says I'm a first-generation Assyrian-American. And for most of you, you're sitting here thinking, why is she telling us that? We know she's Assyrian, right? But for every presentation I give to the public at large, especially when we're out in the masses, I always say that I'm Assyrian-American. It sparks so many conversations, and it's a good opportunity for us to really tell people about who we are, about the different issues that face us today, about our history. And so I never fail. Every opportunity I have, I say I'm Assyrian-American. And so I urge many of you, when you introduce yourselves, tell people we're Assyrian, tell them about who we are, and that's why it's up there. And then the second bullet point just says I went to 2 different high schools. I was in the city for 2 years at Roosevelt High School in the Niles West. They really helped shape my education and give me a wide perspective of what the education systems are in the city versus the suburbs, so I like to share that as well. The other stuff, I have a BA from the University of Illinois in political science, and then a master's from Northwestern in public policy. I am in the Vote Assyrian Executive Board, which I'm very proud of, and we'll tell you more about that later. And I'm a delegate for the 2019 Illinois Women's Institute for Leadership. And the organization trains women on how to run successful campaigns, fundraise. We get tons of training on media, state politics. We travel throughout the state to learn what the makeup of Illinois is. We learn from different legislators. I've met with the governor, lieutenant governor, state reps, senators, our lieutenant attorney general, just everyone throughout the state. So it's been a really great opportunity for me to expand my networking and learn more about the state. So if anyone in particular, my ladies, are interested in this organization, I'd be happy to share more about that later. And as you all know, I was recently elected in the village of Lincolnwood, and I'm a trustee there. So local government. I'm going to start with Chicago because, as you know, I'm elected in Lincolnwood, but the politics are very different, even locally. So in Chicago, there's an executive and a legislative branch, and the mayor of Chicago serves as the executive chief. So then what we have is a city council who serves as the legislative branch, and they help dictate a lot of policy. There are 50 aldermen that serve in the city council, and they come up from 50 different precincts within the city of Chicago. So the city council really votes on all proposed loans, grants, bond issues, land acquisitions and sales, zoning, financial appropriations, amongst other things. And Lori Lightfoot is our current mayor. And for those of you who may or may not have followed this last election, she's actually set to change some of those aldermanic authorities. We're seeing her speak about maybe changing a few things up. There's been a lot of corruption in Chicago politics, as we read about all the time. And so there might be some changes that we'll see coming along with this new mayor. So watch her closely. Okay, so city council, here they are in all of their glory. You can't see all the names, you can't see who they are, but their job is the same across the board. They serve their pockets of the neighborhood. So as a quick question, does anyone know what ward we're in now and who the alderman is here in this area that we're sitting in currently? No vote Assyrian people. Okay, so we are, no, anyone? So we're in the 39th ward, and Sam Nugent is the alderwoman here, but you call everyone alderman. It's one of those things. So the municipal structure, so for example, I'm going to kind of delve deep into Lincolnwood, but this kind of applies across the board for Skokie, Morton Grove, Niles, and other municipalities. A lot of these municipalities are home rule, and that's really important. So home rule means that the communities can exercise power and perform any function unless it's specifically prohibited by state law. I'll give you an example. So right now, the state of Illinois passed recreational marijuana dispensaries. They passed that across the state starting January 2020. This is going to be the lay of the land. But for example, in Lincolnwood and in other municipalities, we have the authority to either set restrictions that are separate from state law or prohibit it altogether. We've seen a trend where certain communities are allowing it with certain restrictions and other communities that are prohibiting it across the board. So Skokie just passed the ordinance. They will be allowing it with restrictions. The village of Lincolnwood just prohibited it this past week. There are 217 home rule communities, and again, that gives these municipalities an extra set of authority to kind of implement more local and close kind of laws as they pertain to their own specific community. All right, so I know you can't really see it, but I'll try to break it down for you. This is our organizational chart for the village of Lincolnwood. So of course up top, you start with the citizens of the village of Lincolnwood. They are the ones who vote in their elected officials. And in Lincolnwood, we have a village president who's our mayor, 6 trustees, and a clerk. And it's really interesting because the village of Lincolnwood, we have staggered elections. So that means that our mayor and 3 trustees are up in one election, and then 2 years later, the other 3 trustees are up. And the reason they do that is so that they don't lose a ton of institutional knowledge all at once. Because if you have a new regime, we'll call it, that comes in, a new mayor and 6 new trustees, there's a lot of catching up to do because a lot of the planning we do is over 5, a 10, a 20-year period at times. And so Skokie's actually not like that. Skokie, they have an election where the mayor and all 6 trustees are up at the same time, which is really interesting because that can mean that, you'll have 7 new people. I mean, has it happened? No. Could it happen? Absolutely. But just so we start at the top, the village president is our mayor. And in most municipalities, the mayor does not have voting power. They're there to kind of engage and kind of run the meeting. And in Lincolnwood specifically, the mayor can only vote when there's a tie. So when the trustees are split on a decision 3-3, then he has a tie-breaking vote, which can be very powerful. Below us, we have our village attorney who advises us on all the laws that are constantly changing and that we need to work with when implementing whatever policies are coming up. And we have a ton of boards and commissions. You've got traffic and zoning, economic development, human relations. I mean, there's a wide range of different boards and commissions we have. I have them listed there. And they all contribute to the overall policy making in the community. For example, you live on Keeler, and your neighbors think that, you know what, there's a lot of speeding going on in our block. What can we do about it? So, you know, you start a petition, you go around and tell people, you know what, we think we need a stop sign here. So how the process would go is that in Lincolnwood, the chief of police would go and set up through our traffic commission a traffic study. And they would set up some, you know, technical aspects to count and see what actual factual data there is to provide that there's either an excess in amount of cars or speeding or whatever the case is. Then whatever results are, they go before our traffic commission. The traffic commission serves to take a look at that issue in depth, and they'll make a recommendation that'll go to the board of trustees and mayor, and they say, we recommend that there be a stop sign on, sorry, was there a hand?
No, it's fly.
And so boards like the Traffic Commission, the Human Relations Commission, planning, zoning, those are all very important because those people really vet and go through, I'm sorry, give me a second. And so those different boards and commissions really contribute to the overall policy making within the communities. And that's why we encourage people, like if you're interested, you know, volunteer. It's not a paid position, but it's a good opportunity to get your foot in the door and start to learn about the community, what the issues are, and how to participate in local government. Oh, and then just to add, as part of our structural organization, we have a finance department, public works, our police department, our fire department, and the board of trustees oversee everything, all the policy making with regard to everything that trickles downwards in the community. So what are the responsibilities of a village trustee? A lot. In the city of Chicago, you have the mayor and aldermen who vote on those issues. There are 50 of them. But in Lincolnwood and Skokie and these smaller suburbs, you have a mayor and 6 trustees who vote on all of the infrastructure updates. For example, we were just in Lincolnwood passed an infrastructure, a big project in Lincolnwood to start to purchase our water from the village of Evanston. We were previously purchasing it from the city of Chicago, but due to uncontrollable rates, we actually went to the village of Evanston to get a more controlled rate for our residents. The only problem is we don't have a way to get that water to us. So in order to do that, there's a large infrastructure update project that goes behind that. So that's one example. We have our budget. We pass that every year that deals with our revenue, our debt. Whatever spending we have in the village goes through the village board. Our finance department that was on the organizational chart, they prep and prepare, and we have multiple meetings in order to pass a budget every year. Safety, you know, policy regard, oh yes, sure.
As far as the power of the vote between the mayor and the 6 trustees, is it equally distributed, or does the mayor kind of serve as an executive where if they disagree, their vote went through a different structure? Or?
No, so the structure stays the same throughout. We each have an equal amount for when it comes to voting, but when there's a tie, he'll break the tie, and then that
And
will.
prior to the mayor, did the mayor's vote count as a vote?
Never.
No,
They
so
ne-
it's
yeah.
almost like that power.
Yeah. So any vote usually typically goes before the board of trustees, and they vote. A lot of stuff you'll see unanimously go because it's day-to-day, pretty standard business that we deal with. But on controversial issues regarding, you know, recreational cannabis, like I said, was one of them that we just had. In Lincolnwood, small things like the HRC, our Human Relations Commission, recommended a flags of diversity program, and that was very kind of like a heated debate over certain things. But yeah, that's a good question. So we talked about safety, policing, fire. That all goes through the board. Board makes decisions when it comes to policy in that regard. I currently serve on the Long Range Planning Committee and the Committee on Ordinances, Rules, and Buildings. They don't sound exciting because they're not, but they're very important. They're very important. They take a look at, you know, long range planning in the community. We take a look at very, you know, detailed zoning and other issues that impact the community. But again, it's a lot of nitty-gritty work, but I love it, so I'm not complaining. And then I am currently a liaison to the EDC and Parks and Recreation. So there's always a trustee that serves as kind of a hands-on person. So when we're meeting, you know, Parks and Rec, and they have questions with regard to certain issues, you have staff there and you have a liaison to kind of answer questions as they come up. So I just want to mention that Skokie, Morton Grove, Niles, similar across the board. Similar structure, similar responsibilities, and similar voting kind of. Okay, a little bit about Lincolnwood elections. And I always go back to Lincoln because that's what I know. But again, a lot of this stuff applies across the board. We have the mayor and the trustees have 4-year terms, and there are no term limits for the trustees or the mayor. The elections are staggered. We talked about that. And what's a really interesting statistic is that about 80% of the residents in Lincolnwood are actually registered to vote, which is huge. That's a really big number. But then if you look at the turnout, it's closer to 20%, which is very small. It's very unfortunate, but it's like this. You'll see it across the board. Voter turnout is very low, especially in the local elections. They're always so when you look at these elections and the results, typically they tend to be really close. And I know you're asking yourself right now, like, she's saying close, so how close is it? So we're going to take a look at a specific example. So this was the previous election in 2017 in Lincolnwood. So the mayor, the current mayor, Mayor Bass, he won the election by 283 votes. First place to second place was a difference of 39 votes. Second to third place was a difference of 120 votes. And third to last place was a difference of 21 votes. So when you take a look at that, you think about Lincolnwood is approximately 2,500 people. 12,500 people, 20% voter turnout, like we talked about. You see it there in the numbers, it's minuscule. And the margins that people are winning by, again, very, very, oh, I'm sorry, it's a little blurry. But
So did those 4 run for 3 trustees?
they did, yeah. And so when you're looking at an election from our perspective, and I'm going to shift a little bit to Vote Assyrian and the work that we did, and then we'll go back to that at the end, but I do want to mention that when we were interested as Vote Assyrian about getting organized and thinking about running in Lincolnwood, we took a step back and we did the research, we did the work. We looked at previous elections, we looked at the registration numbers, and we looked at our Assyrian list. We sat down with a few people and we said, how many Assyrians do you know and how many do you know? And we started from really, when we say grassroots, that's what it was. It was an Excel spreadsheet. Who do you know? Who do you know? We put them all down. And then I actually pulled the voter file in Lincolnwood and pulled every name that looked or sounded potentially Assyrian. Old school. How many names? 8,000 plus? Author went through them all. Pulled everyone, and then we went through this really calculated process of finding out who those people were and knocking on their doors and saying, hey, you know, I'm such and such and I'm running for this, and you live here, and how many more people live here? 5 more people. None of you are registered to vote? Great, let's get you all out there. And so we took a really calculated approach to figuring out what our win number was, how many votes we needed, and we then, I mean, I've been active in the Lincolnwood community at large. I was PTA vice president, and I'm just active as it is. But then we thought, you know what, this will be an interesting case project for us to take a look and see what impact the Assyrian community can make. Yes.
You're a Democrat?
Am I a Democrat? I am.
Is it a good idea to keep it like that when others are running for different offices? Because I've noticed in the last couple of years, we've had conservatives run for
Sure.
different offices.
Well,
which
so,
didn't go anywhere.
yeah. Well, so just so you know, at the municipal level, like I ran we weren't under any party. So we run as just, we were the Alliance Party. I ran with 2 other candidates. And so we try to get people to focus in, especially at the local level, at the issues. So when people would ask me, are you Democrat or Republican, I would answer them honestly, because I'm not going to hide it.
Right.
But then I would say, well, what issues are important to you? And I promise you 99.9% of the time we agreed on those issues. So it's important to get people back to the table and have these important conversations. Let's not get caught up in party politics. Let's talk about, hey, I want my property taxes to be controlled. I want a safe neighborhood. I want a good school. I want health care for my family. And we can agree on that across the board. So sometimes when we get caught up in those party politics, it's important to bring people back in, especially at the local level. It's very important. But it's a very good question. So let's fast forward to our election in 2019. And here you have it. So you can't see, but I ran with a group called the Alliance Party. We're the green numbers. And the mayor in the last election won with approximately 1,100 votes. And here I have 1,435. So I took first place amongst the 6 candidates, but first amongst the 2 other candidates I ran with, which is really exciting because it went to show that a lot of hard work pays off. And thanks to my ties to the community, but also the Assyrian community, we identified approximately 500 to 600 Assyrians within the community. And by the end of early voting, What was the percentage, Ramsin, that we had
Percentage?
come up
The
with?
overall, okay, so 25% of the overall early votes cast in Lincolnwood were on our list
Were
of
Assyrian
Assyrians.
people.
So 25% is.
Yeah. And so when we look at those numbers, and Lincolnwood is a small example because in Skokie, our numbers are close to 20,000. And we have zero representation in Skokie, which is a real shame. We're starting to see Assyrian people come forward, hold that thought, and serve in different commissions and boards, which is important. It's a good start to learn and to organize, but I think this is a step in the right direction. Andrew's great.
Yeah, so what do you suggest we do for the Skokie?
Oh. Yeah, well, Vote Assyrian has been working on that, and maybe we can have a separate meeting and talk about organizing efforts, because these are things that we're working on in Niles and Skokie and other surrounding communities, because we want more representation and we want to do more, but we need a lot of help. And so when we shift over to Vote Assyrian, we'll talk more about that. But again, it was small town politics. I can't begin to tell you how intense, how ugly, how negative. I mean, it got really difficult. But if you surround yourself with the right people, and I was blessed because my family had my back and Vote Assyrian had my back, so we really were able to tackle everything as it came up. But like we said, we were very excited. I think the number, 585 votes more than everyone. So that's really exciting.
And you were the top candidate, right? She's not going to say that about herself.
And then I'll leave you with, two more things. I don't want to forget to mention, we have two other elected officials. Tony Kalakarobis, he's a golf trustee, so that's always great. And then Naima Abraham, she serves as a board member on District 219, and we're very proud of both of them too. And there are times where, you get caught up in everything, but there are more people. District 219 is a very important platform for people like you in the Assyrian Student Association to have a voice that's heard. You've gone through those schools, Niles West, Niles North, you can really help contribute to that conversation. So Naima is there, and she's always been active with Vote Assyrian, so hopefully we can do more of these in the future. But I'll leave you with these thoughts. So they say all politics is local, and that's really important to me. People get caught up in this whole national, Trump, Republican, Democrat, but for me, the local level is very important. The local level is what affects everything, from your property taxes, your water bill, your school district, the safety within your community, your garbage pickup. I mean, every aspect of decision making is done at the local level, and that's why, although we get caught up in these other elections, I urge you all to really pay attention to your local elections. Meet the candidates, meet the elected officials, ask them questions, ask them how they feel on important issues that are important to you. Make sure you're pushing them and telling them, hey, we're not seeing any representation. We have X amount of, the percentage of people here. Why are we not seeing any Assyrians in any offices? Those are difficult questions to ask. I want to add that in Lincolnwood, we have 5 different commissioners. We have a Parks and Rec commissioner, we have an Economic Development commissioner, we have a Traffic commissioner, and a Zoning Board commissioner. 3 of those have come on since I've been elected, which I'm very happy to share with everyone. And it's always about finding the best candidate, right? But if you have a great candidate and they're Assyrian, it's a win-win. And when Assyrians are not at the table and they're not aware and they don't have a local official, they can say, hey, Atour, I have a passion for X. How can I serve this community? It's a matter of just bridging the gap for them, and it's really important that we start to do that. So, volunteer, if you can. Volunteer in your local communities. It could just be once a month, go and see what they're doing. Go to the board meeting. A lot of them are televised. I watch them at home, but again, I nerd out really hardcore on this stuff, so you might not be as into it as I am, but, and then Vote Assyrian. We have tons of events, and we'll talk more about that when Ramsin and I present more on Vote Assyrian, but we have so many opportunities whether it's a candidates forum, or we do canvassing, or we knock on doors. I mean, knocking doors, can you imagine for Assyrian people? Like, there were Assyrian houses I would knock, and Ramsin will attest to this. Andrew, hold that thought. And I would say, hi, my name is Atour, and I'm running for you. She'd say, ay, Bobby, tawar shtecha chai. And then I'm just like, oh my God, because we're a time crunch, get all these marks. You don't want to be rude, so you end up going in, you drink the chai, and so you get out of there. I was like, oh, I just lost like a half hour. But part of our process, and that's what makes our community so wonderful. I have never felt so much support from the Assyrian community across the board. Organizations, churches. There were people who were so active in our community, and no one turned me down when I asked for help. And that's what I ask for our community and our future, is to keep doing that, pushing each other and supporting one another. I'll leave you with that, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
elections, does each municipality choose when they are having elections, or is it across the board? It's going to be at this
Same time,
this
yeah. Across the board, the same time. They follow your kind of state and local elections, and that's why sometimes people, when they're going through a list of judges and everything else, by the time they get to local, some people don't even fill those out. But they follow your regular elections.
And what's a good outlet in general to learn more about who's running for your local government? I feel
Like a neutral one, or like a...
Yeah, I guess. Or how can one learn more about who's running?
Right. So there's a website I actually used. There was a year, I think one of the last elections, where there were like 30 judges or something. And judges are really important, because these are the people who are going to make decisions that really impact, cases and case law. And so there was an app I used called, and maybe we can put together a document. It's like ballotready.org, and then each judge underneath it said like what they stood for, what organizations supported them, they ranked them, they gave them rankings, so it really helped, and it gave their backgrounds and education. That was like a neutral platform because it didn't have any party politics. But I would say, your local paper, which is like, Lincolnwood, we get it. I don't get a newspaper, but it's online, Vote Assyrian. We try to, get as much information out there as possible. But for local politics, it's hard. Some people, certain organizations, they cater to the people they know, they participate and vote. So a lot of the times communities like the Assyrian communities and other communities that are not typically as engaged get completely passed over. And we need to put a stop to that.
I just want to add, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit on my slides, but this is why primary elections are so important. It's really important, I think, that your voice means more, and that's what you see who the candidates are that we can support. So,
Andrew, I'm sorry, did you have a question?
I was going to tie back to.
Okay. But I'm not going anywhere. Ramsin will go next. If anyone has any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So I'm going to start off real quick. By the way, feel free to have pizza, donuts, coffee if you haven't already.
Are we have a pause right now?
Just like a couple minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Slides. Okay.
Yeah. Everyone get their refreshments, ready to go back a little bit? Is that okay? Okay, so I want to introduce a candidate who's running for 16th Congressional District. Her name is Denise Stoneback. And she came by today, and if it's okay, we'll let her say a couple of words before we start our next presentation.
Hey everyone, thank you so much. Thank you, Atour and Ramsin and everyone here. Yes, my name is Denise Stoneback. I'm running for 16th District State Representative, and I just found out about this event today, and I thought it was a fantastic event. I want to applaud your organizations for putting this together. I think it is so extremely important that people from different ethnic minorities and communities come together and participate and engage in local, state, and federal government. And the work, what you were saying earlier about local government is completely 100% true. It is where everything, a lot of intersection comes, and people don't realize how much local government actually impacts their lives, but it really does. And I'll just say really briefly a few words about myself. I grew up in Skokie. So the 16th District, for those of who are not familiar with it, encompasses the southern part of Skokie, almost all of Lincolnwood, the 50th Ward of Chicago, and a tiny bit of Morton Grove. And so I grew up in Skokie, went to all public schools there, graduated from Niles North High School, went away to college, came back, and decided to raise my own family there. And so my son just graduated from Niles North a few years ago in 2017, so I'm a big believer in public education. My mother was actually a school teacher as well at Mather High School. And just a few words about my family background, because I think I can relate to some of your experiences as well. So she married my father, who's from China. He was a civil engineer, and they met. She was teaching him English. And so it was kind of a romantic story. And she worked with the immigrant community as an ESL teacher and had students from all over the world. And there was one project that she worked on that I remember that really left an impression on me when I was growing up, which was she had a huge mural and had students depict in artwork a little area of their homeland to kind of remember it, a favorite place, and write a little story about it, and created a huge mural and a little book to go along with it, honoring their homelands. So the importance that these students were having, placing on their homelands and their cultures of origin was just something that was completely honored through this entire art project, which was put forth in a very creative way. And I think that that really is what brings so many of us together in our communities and in our district, which is incredibly diverse, and honoring our different cultures. So anyway, that's just a little bit about me. I don't want to take up all your time. I really appreciate the introduction, and I hope I will earn your support. You can look me up. I'm on Facebook. I have a website, and I guess that's it.
And they'll probably get a knock on their door from you, right?
They will. I am already knocking on doors pretty much every day. So if I knock on your door, I will be able to tell you more about myself and my candidacy and my campaigns.
And we'll share a link to your
Sure.
website when we do a follow-up email.
Great.
We can share all of our information.
Great.
Thanks for being here.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Before I get started, before I tell you a little bit about myself, I want to mention something that's very important. A lifelong resident of the 16th district right here, the district she's running for. 32 years old. The person that was, well, the current representative was Mark Kalish. He was appointed. The person before him was Representative Lou Lang, who was also appointed. Do you guys want to take a guess when he was appointed?
A long time.
It's when I was born. Literally, 1987. So I, as a 16th district resident, constituent, have not had a chance to vote in 32 years. I know I've been alive 13. I could vote technically for 14. Haven't been able to cast a ballot. This will be the first time. Why am I mentioning this? Because that is how important primaries are. That's how important they are. Mr. Khashaba, you mentioned something about Republican, Democrat. So I want to present something to you. I don't identify. I refuse to. I refuse to. That's just me personally. We each have our own personal opinions. But in a district that is roughly 80% Democratic, would it behoove us, anyone that is even a Republican, whoever that is, to perhaps maybe pull a Democratic ballot and choose a Democrat that has more with your stances in line? That's where your vote matters. That was my point with this. Our primaries are so important. And I want to pose a question to you as well. Please be honest, it's okay. We've all missed an election here or there. How many of you in 2016, okay, in the 2016 presidential election, how many of you voted in the presidential primary? Okay. How many of you voted in the general? I will argue, more hands went up for the general than the primary, just so you guys know. So some of you guys skipped the primary. That means that Denise will probably not see you guys on her list when she's going to knock on doors. Because what people do when they're running for office is they want to go to the people that they know are going to vote every single election. So the people that vote in the Lincolnwood election that Atour referred to, they don't miss any election. If they're voting in a municipal election that's local, and you see the numbers, you guys all see the numbers there, they're voting in every election. Okay? What you call people that vote in primaries, whether it be a Republican primary or a Democratic primary, what most people will look at when they're knocking on doors is triple Dems, or if you're a Republican candidate, triple Republicans, or whatever they're called. Hard Dems, hard Republicans. If you guys don't pull primary ballots, I'm sorry to say, that is when you are allowing your vote to not matter. Just so we make that clear. Okay? It's really important to vote in primaries. I applaud Denise for running because it's not an easy seat. The person that is in there right now was appointed. It's going to be a very close race. You know, I want you guys to hear out both sides, but just know that the primary is very important. Do not wait till November to vote. Do not. I don't mean this November, next November. March 2020 is the important election. Seriously, I mean that. Sorry, I'm going to take a step back now. That was a perfect segue I thought for me. So it's really important to me. Primaries are a big deal, I think. A little bit about myself. Born and raised in Chicago, 50th Ward. Went to Lane Tech High School, and then I went to Northeastern. I obtained my BA in political science from Northeastern. I served as the inaugural executive director, of the Assyrian-American Chamber of Commerce. From that, idea sparked, and one of my fellow co-founders of Vote Assyrian actually is here. Rain Hannah's in the back. Rain, say hello. Say hello. Rain did a lot. She did a lot for Vote Assyrian, then moved on, and now she's working on the federal level for the community, doing a great job.
Can I just say, when I was involved in Vote Assyrian, we were nowhere near being able to help a candidate get elected, so what you guys have done since then is amazing, and that goes to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When I was the director of the chamber, I was going around, and we're going to talk more about this when Otto and I come up and speak about voter street together, but we realized what kind of a large condensed population we have in small areas. It's insane. And we could be a huge player in a lot of these races, state rep races, state senate races, municipal level races, you name it. We can be very, very influential and important in these elections. Co-founder of Voter Street, like I said, and now we'll start on the federal stuff, and Otto will come back up. Hopefully, if Rob's not here yet, we'll talk a little bit about Voter Street. But I want to pose another question. I like to ask a lot of questions. What was the first governing document of the United States of America? Does anybody know? Besides you out there. Does anybody else know? Besides Alter and Denise, does anybody else know? That wasn't really, well, that was a declaration, but it wasn't a governing document. We didn't use it for government structure, you know? It didn't put in any kind of structure.
Constitution.
So something predated the Constitution. Perfect time to start. The Articles of Confederation. No, this is my favorite part about the United States federal government is exactly why we got rid of the Articles of Confederation and why it was such a battle for our founding fathers to go through this. So it was created in 1777. Obviously, you guys know Declaration of Independence was made in 76. So we needed something while the fight was going on with Great Britain to govern the 13 colonies. How are you going to get all these folks together? There was a bunch of people that left for religious freedom from England, came here. All right, we want to fight these guys. We want to be free from the king. What do we do, though? So they created the Articles of Confederation, and it was ineffective for a couple of reasons. Largely because it was weak. There was no way for the federal government to impose anything on the states, like literally nothing. They couldn't tax them, they couldn't do nothing. To the point, one example that always stuck out to me in school was think about the inefficiency of this when it comes to trading. And we're not talking about in 2019 where I can fax things or scan them over. This is on horseback and horse and carriage. Each state could print its own currency. Literally, each state had its own currency. It was ridiculous. But why were they struggling? Because they didn't want the federal government to have so much power. Think about it. They just left a tyrannical government where the king kind of ruled everything. You didn't have a say at all. So it was a back and forth, and a reoccurring theme you'll constantly see in our federal government is checks and balances. That's my favorite part about it. You will always see checks and balances. The president is not as powerful as everybody thinks. Neither is the Congress. Neither is the Supreme Court. They each play a role. Okay? So obviously after it was deemed to be ineffective, they had a constitutional convention, and the U.S. Constitution was ratified, and then it was effective in 1789. Our form of federalism is called dual federalism, referring to certain powers being reserved for the federal government and certain powers being reserved for the state government. So there's two different kinds of things going into each other. And like I said, we share the vision of powers, checks and balances. Also, so one way to form the checks and balances is federal government, state government, certain rights, each kind of handles their own thing. If there's ever an issue that are conflicting between the two, federal law always, in every case, will supersede the state law. I think it's important to know. One example I think everybody can relate to is what also mentioned earlier, is recreational marijuana. Although states have passed it, right? A lot of states have passed it. I think over like 17, 20 states have passed it now. Still, the federal government could come in and shut down operation anytime they want, if they so choose.
Sorry,
That's
if I
okay.
can jump in. That means federally it's illegal, meaning you can't make any bank deposits to any federally insured banks. And these are cash businesses that are operating, so there's still a disconnect, but the federal law is the overall.
That's the overall law. If they wanted to, like, look, most of the time, obviously, they're letting people run their stuff, but if they wanted to, they could. If they ever saw a conflict and they wanted to put an end to it, they could. And I think it's important to note. So they reserve that power for the federal government because at the end of the day, what if it's an issue of national security, right? The federal government has to be able to have the final say. But they also ensured a checks and balances by having three branches of government: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. So we'll get more into the branches, different branches of government, starting with the legislative branch. And a lot of this probably is just a refresher to you all. I'm sure you know it, but please feel free to stop and ask any questions. There are 535 members of Congress. That number does not change. 100 senators, 2 from each state, 435 reps for the House of Representatives. That number of reps is based on population. So the higher populated a state is, the more state representatives they will have, which makes sense because there's more area to cover, right? There's more people to represent. So And I put in a note there not to be confused with the Electoral College, which has 538 votes, just a fun little test. Does anybody know where those, so 535 of the electoral votes are counted by the senators and the reps. Where do the other 3 electoral votes come from? Justin, you know this, don't answer. You got it. Washington, D.C. They got 3 electoral votes in D.C. But so Congress drafts and passes legislation. Both the Senate and the House must come to an agreement on the bill before it's given to the President to sign into law. Another version of checks and balances. I'm telling you, it's a reoccurring theme and I love it. It says if the President vetoes the bill, both chambers of Congress can override the President with a 2/3 vote, which, I mean, that sounds fair to me, right? If 2/3 of the voting power is approving it, the President shouldn't have enough say, I don't care who it is, to be able to veto that. That's the checks and balances. So the House requires a simple majority, it's 218 out of 435, so 50 plus 1 essentially. And the Senate requires 60%, or 60 out of 100 votes. Except for presidential nominations, which played out recently, they only need 51, just a simple majority for that. And the Senate confirms presidential appointments, so that, once again, so some rights, some powers are reserved for the Senate, and some are reserved for the House. We won't get into all of them. It's pretty detailed with like House appropriations and committees and all that. But basically, big takeaways are the Senate confirms presidential appointments, and then the House initiates bills that impose taxes. So that's important to know. The terms are different, of course, elected terms. The senators serve 6-year terms, and reps serve 2-year terms. Neither have term limits, which I don't know if you guys are for or against that. That's probably a topic for another day. But
Are you
sorry.
taking questions during your?
Yeah, please, no.
Okay.
Yeah, anyone.
With the primary election, I feel personally, some other people do too, that it's more empowering because your vote is kind of more direct. And in a lot of developing and developed nations, the population actually gets to vote for their president. And so what is advice, or in what ways do you feel that there's an argument that with the Electoral College, like how can you still encourage people that their vote matters when it comes to
So the Electoral College it's a very confusing concept because only 99.9% of the time the electors vote the way the constituents vote. So it's not like they've really gone against, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
Yeah, but there are times where the popular vote does vary.
Yeah, true,
And so
true.
how do you, and with that, I feel sometimes the system is semi-outdated. So how do you kind of,
And there could be
with vote Assyria and other things, what are ways that you can still kind of encourage people to get out their vote when it comes down to that? Because like I said, in the beginning, you feel more empowered. You can actually pick the candidate off of the ballot you choose, and then when it comes down to, it's pretty bipartisan. So you're either voting for a Democrat or Republican when it comes to your president. I mean, like I said, when you see other nations kind of be able for their population to directly pick who they have, and then you feel.
Do you mind if I ask what some of those developing nations are? I'd just like to know the population of them.
One thing, I lived in Brazil for a while, and Brazil is a nation that their population directly votes their president. And they kind of express their powers, like when they wanted to impeach Dilma, they did. So, they kind of have that power, and I feel they can express it more. They're developing, technically not developed, and I think some European countries not great for developing this system.
That's a great question, and I think it's pretty open-ended. I think, my personal opinion, I think it is an outdated system. I do, and I think it was a system back in the day that was put in place to help keep the normal people down. Because technically they could have voted against how we voted, right? It is an outdated system. It's not perfect, but there is no perfect system. I want people, all of us, to get out of the habit when we think federal, that the president is the most important thing. Guess what? The president serves 2 terms. Has very minimal power when it comes to everyday things. Jan Schakowsky, our congresswoman, has been serving for 20 years. So, I mean, there's no electoral votes when it comes to voting for your congressman or congresswoman. That's still federal government. But in terms of a primary, once again, there's no electoral votes in a primary.
Yeah, and that's why I feel
So that's
our
what,
vote's
right,
most
so,
empowering.
exactly.
Yeah,
Other than that, I mean, yeah, go ahead, Justin.
No, I was just going to add to what you said, but there are 2 states, I think Maine and Nebraska, right, where, so every state except for those 2 have a winner-take-all system where, like, whoever wins that state by popular vote gets all the electoral votes. There are 2 states that actually get votes based on, like, the district. I think you have it in your slides, right? So maybe if we,
I took it off,
in whatever state you live in, if you tell your representatives, like, hey, I think that's a more fair system, and if there's enough,
Yeah.
if you drum up enough support for that, like, you could, This abolishing the electoral college is another discussion, and like
Just you had shared something
Yeah,
where
I was
they
asking
fair
Yeah.
because of
rank
the-
voting,
yeah.
right?
What?
Don't you share rank voting? Some the state passed
yeah,
that
that's
recently?
yeah,
So there's things that I think what you're saying is picking up steam.
right.
It's going to take time to change it, though. You know, but Justin's right. What he's saying is lobby your governments, lobby the local
Yeah,
governments.
reach
lobby-
out to your representatives.
Right.
and-
Sorry, any other questions before we move on? Very good question. You stumped me. You did. I think we got through this. Yes, we did. Okay, so now we'll move on to the executive branch. I know it seems glamorous and all, but it's actually kind of boring stuff in my opinion. The president holds all the power for this branch of the government, and other members report to the president. Our president is the executive officer and also the commander-in-chief of our army, still till today. Technically, he is. Other parts of the executive branch include the vice president, the executive office of the president, which is overseen by the chief of staff, and then the president's cabinet, which is extremely large. The main responsibilities of a president: sign legislation. But it's important to note that he's just signing, and I'm saying he because there hasn't been a woman president yet. Just sort of.
Not yet.
Hopefully that'll change soon. Hopefully there's people in here, in this very room, that'll happen for. But the main responsibility, one of them, is to sign what Congress has drafted as legislation into law, or veto it, obviously. He appoints the cabinet members, the court justices, and leaders of federal agencies such as Attorney General, and so on and so forth. Obviously, an important part of it is diplomacy with other nations. You know, it's important to do. Obviously, as we've seen, compare presidents. Some have different approaches versus others. Doesn't make it right or wrong, just different, I think. But yeah, also an important thing is the president has the power to pardon criminals, really, people that have been convicted of a crime on a federal level. The president can pardon them after X amount of years have gone by.
Yeah, if anyone's been following the Villivalam storyline, that's been an interesting one for us local politicals. Was just
Yeah.
that
No,
because
she's right.
President Trump's talked about pardoning Villivalam, which is interesting to see it play out.
I'd like to see it. I think they're attacking him too much, but that's my opinion. I'll keep my opinions to myself. The vice president, and some responsibilities of the vice president. If something should happen to the president, impeachment, God forbid death, or other things, the vice president is the first in line to take over the presidency. The other thing is the vice president has the tie-breaking vote in the Senate.
Let's all clap to him as well.
Yeah, it's for you. It's for you, my friend.
Not necessary. Hi, everyone. How's it going?
But yeah, so the cabinet includes the vice president and 15 heads of executive departments. You guys see them: Department of Defense, Department of Agriculture, Homeland Security, blah blah blah. And then I'll move on to the judicial branch. I know the main attraction is here, so I'll move fast, I promise. The most important part of the judicial branch is just that it's broken down into layers. There's 94 U.S. district courts throughout the country, and then 13 appellate courts or court of appeals. So that process starts in one of the 94 courts. If the person that is facing trial does not get the answer they want, they have the chance of appealing. It'll go up to the Court of Appeals. If they get not the decision they want again, they could push it to the Supreme Court. But it's very important to note, and we'll skip further down on my slide, if you can see this number down here, 7,500 requests. 7,500 requests are made each year from the Supreme Court to hear cases. About 150 are heard a year. That's it. So that's less than like 0.0, less than 1% for sure. But I think that what people should keep in mind, my opinion, the most important part of the Supreme Court is judicial review. So judicial review is basically if the Supreme Court has to deem whether or not a law that was put into place by Congress or signed off by the President is unconstitutional. That's very important. I mean, our Constitution, just so you all know, is the longest current active Constitution in the country. When I was studying in school in the Northeastern, I remember I took a class on the French Revolution. There was an entire class on the French Revolution. They had 26 constitutions in like 30 years. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, we like to knock our Constitution. Certain things may or may not be outdated. But if it's been in place since 1791 and it's still active and working, I think our founding fathers did a pretty good job. I think their vision, they were very forward-thinking. They didn't want the power to be in line with one person, and they always wanted checks and balances. So this is yet another example where we see a checks and balances. The Supreme Court can check the legislative branch. If they pass a law that's unconstitutional, the law is done. Other than that, I'm pretty much done. If you want to speak about voter Syrian, should we let Ron present first?
You know what, maybe we'll let Ron present first, give him that opportunity.
Any questions though before Ron gets up here? Sorry, I moved fast towards the end. You guys can catch us after and ask all the questions you want, okay?
Senator, if you want to present, we can switch over to you.
I'll wait.
We finished up.
Oh,
We're good, we're good, yeah. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Not that you only the slide, but.
So is this the only slide or is there other
No,
slides?
there's more, but.
Okay.
So,
Can you come over on this side, sir?
Yeah.
watch your step.
Don't call me sir, please. Hi, everyone. My name is Ron. Hi, Denise. My name is Ron Villivalam. I'm the state senator for the 8th District, which encompasses 21 neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, from Montrose Avenue North past Devon Avenue, so Albany Park to all of Devon Avenue, essentially. But Sauganash, Edgebrook, Forest Glen, Mayfair, North Mayfair, where I live. And then I have 6 suburban municipalities: Lincolnwood, Skokie, Niles, Morton Grove, Glenview, unincorporated Des Plaines. So about half city, half suburbs. I argue that I have the most diverse district. Atour, Ramsin have heard me say this several times. We have about 58% white, 25% Asian American, 13% Hispanic, 5% African American. Within that, excuse me, white population, we have I think 20 to 25% the Jewish population, our Jewish population folks. We have, sorry? Oh,
I'm sorry.
hi. Let me know if you have any questions. So we have, and that includes Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Jewish folks. We have the largest, or maybe the largest, Assyrian population. There's Queen of All Saints in Sauganash, which is one of the largest Catholic churches in the city of Chicago. Huge Muslim population. I mean, the list goes on. And so I'm really excited because I get to work with a lot of different communities. It's a lot of education, a lot of learning for me, but it's also a lot of bringing people together. Because at the end of the day, what are the important issues for people? It's making sure we take care of our seniors, people with disabilities, making sure our children get a quality education, making sure we're for no discrimination anywhere, safe communities, and so forth. Prior to this, I worked for SEIU Healthcare, which is a union that represents 90,000 home care providers, child care providers, nursing home workers, hospital workers. So I was able to advocate for funding for home care and child care and Medicaid. Before that, I worked for Congressman Brad Schneider in the 10th District as his outreach director and other capacities as well. And my wife and I, we have an 11-month-old. We live in North Mayfair. It's been great. It's been a busy couple of years, to say the least.
If I can say, he got married, got elected, and had a baby in like a year. It's like really fast.
My wife may or may not remind me of that from time to time. And my personal background, my parents came from India in the 1970s. And my dad was an engineer in India. My mom was a teacher. They couldn't get those jobs when they first got here. They had to work as a dishwasher and cashier, and eventually they went back to school and were able to get degrees and finish with 25 plus years of a career in public service. And so I never forgot their struggle. I think about it. My brother and sister who are older say that I was born when my parents were getting into the middle class, so what do I know? But my parents didn't change. Like when they got decent jobs, they still found the cheapest gallon of milk and the cheapest gas and whatever. And so they didn't change, and those are the values that I have. And more importantly, I think that struggle is still what people are facing. There are still people coming to this country. There's still people that are working to get to the middle class. And so I decided to run because I felt like I could be a voice for those folks and be more proactive and get things done. And so I'm the first Asian American state senator in Illinois, first Indian American in the Illinois General Assembly. thinking I'm becoming known as the first Assyrian too.
This means all of our churches, all of our Assyrian people in every event. So yeah.
And so I think my role here today is to talk about state government and talk about the process. So obviously, as it's laid out there, there's 3 different branches, and I'll touch base briefly on the other 2. The judicial branch is obviously separate and important. It is complicated, even for someone that has been around the process. Obviously, we have an Illinois Supreme Court. We have basically judges at the county level, at sub-circuit level, and so forth, in every part of the state. And what I can tell you is that they are elected, and for the most part, there are some that are appointed, associate judges. But also, every county kind of operates differently, and so it's challenging. And that's one of the things that we have to take on is how do we make the judicial process more simpler to for people to be a part of or understand, because as you can imagine, it's hard if you get a ticket or if you get something where you have to go to court and English isn't your first language, or you're working 3 jobs or whatever. It's hard to navigate, and so we've tried to do some things, but again, they're a separate entity. The executive branch is very important. I mean, it's essentially what I tell people is, you can talk to me anytime. You absolutely should talk to me during January through the end of May. But after May, we are not in session, so we're not legislating until veto session in October and November. So everything that we worked on in terms of legislation, the bills we passed, and whatever has become law when the governor signs it, now the executive branch implements it, right? And so, the Department of Human Services, the Department of Corrections, the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, these are all departments that implement the laws that we've passed. And they have, there's the way the laws are written is we give them certain parameters, but you have to understand, they also, there is certain leeway too within those parameters, because we can't spell out, exactly what we want in every situation. So that's why there's a huge partnership, because if I introduce a bill and passes, and then the department's implementing it in a way that I may not, or I think that they should be doing more or less or whatever, you better believe they're going to get a call from me and say, hey, what's going on, and either it's going to get fixed or we're going to have a conversation, and I might be introducing another bill to make sure that they know this is what I really meant. And so it's really important, the interaction is really important between the legislative branch and the executive. And I could go into a lot more detail on the executive, but obviously there's governor, lieutenant governor, and they have 20 or so secretaries for the different departments, and each of those folks have to be confirmed by the Senate, which again is the give and take of the legislative and executive branch. So the legislative branch, there's 59 state senators in Illinois. There's 118 state reps. Each senator represents about 217,000 people. Each representative represents about half of that, so around 108,000 across the state of Illinois. And we are in legislative session from January through the end of May. It's basically January, February, and March are about 3 days a week. April is about, 3 nights a week. April is 4 nights a week for 2 weeks. Then we're back for 2 weeks that kind of overlap with Passover and Easter. And then May, we're down there 5 nights a week. And then we end, our legislative session typically ends at the end of, well, there you go, end of May.
We wanted to make sure you knew it off the top of your head.
Yeah. This is like a test for me. So that's all true. And one thing, one side note is for state senators. So for state reps are up every 2 years. State senators. So as you all know, there's a census, which I'm sure is a topic that everyone has talked about here at some point. Is the census is taken every 10 years, after the census, they do redistricting, and at that point, the senators kind of, I don't know if I actually don't know. I don't know if it's actually picking out of a hat or some kind of system where they pick what's called 2 4-year terms and 1 2-year term. So, so essentially, in 2022 or 2021, I can pick a 244, a 424, or 442. What that means is, if I pick a 442, that means I'll be up in 2026, 2030, and then 2032. So basically, senators every 10 years they get 2 4-year terms and 1 2-year term. So just to clarify the terms there. It's an amazing process. It can also be an ugly process, the legislative process. Basically what happens is starting, really, some people start in June after session is over, all the way to January of the next year. They start to have meetings. They start, whether it's with constituents, with stakeholders, about legislation to introduce or work on in the next session. And it ranges from, meeting with the people that want the bill introduced to meeting with the people that are vehemently opposed and seeing what can be done. And so some people start in June, some people start in November, some people start in January. But the bill filing deadline is essentially late January, early February, where you have to file your bills. Excuse me. So this previous session, and it's probably about average, there are 6,000 bills. There were 6,000 bills that were introduced, and so you can imagine no one has read all of them. But as you can imagine, like I was aggressive. I introduced 40 or 50 bills, and again, it ranges from what is the personal or professional agenda of the legislator to if a constituent comes to me with a bill and says, "Hey, can you introduce this? Because I have this issue." I'm more than likely to say, "Yeah, let's talk about it and let's see if we can file something." And a lot of times introducing legislation, well, not a lot of times, all the time, introducing legislation is a way to start a conversation. So like if a department is not doing something that a constituent is asking for, I can introduce legislation, and it's almost like magic. The department liaison is at my door the next day, but that's kind of how the process is supposed to work. That's my job, and that's their job, and so 6,000 bills is probably about average, and then the committee process starts. The House has their committee process, the Senate has their committee process. I sit on 8 committees, so I have both the appropriations committees, appropriations 1 and 2, which essentially means that each department and different stakeholders come before us to present their budget, what they're asking for in terms of funding, and we kind of ask questions about what do you need this for, what do you need that for. So for example, the Illinois, and the problem that still exists, the Illinois Department of Professional IDFPR, Illinois Department of Financial Professional Regulation. They're basically in charge of the licensing for anything in Illinois, or most things, or business-related things. And so one of the issues that was taking place is that for a beautician or a nail technician, they have to take an exam in order to get a license. And more than half of the people in that industry are Vietnamese. Well, the language that's being offered for the exam is just English. And so you have this hurdle here of language access. And so, it's been going on for some time. So I introduced a bill, and then the department, because the department, generally speaking, departments anywhere, any state, don't necessarily want things in statute because they want some flexibility to be able to perform their duties. So they came to me and they said, no, we're going to handle this. We're going to do this. And so I said, okay. And I didn't move forward with the bill. And so we'll see. If they handle it, great. If they don't, I'm moving the bill next session. And that's, part of what I was talking about before. But that's just one example of interacting with the department but filing a bill, and that's the type of bill that could be filed. Very specific, bill. And so the committee's appropriations one. So I brought that up. That's why I brought it up. I brought that up when the secretary or the nominee for the Department of IDFPR came to testify. I said, this is an important issue for people in my district. Will you do something about it? She said, yes, we will look into it. So that's part of the committee process, is bringing those questions up when they come before your committee. That's both the Appropriations Committee. I also serve on Labor, Human Services, Transportation, Supplier Diversity, the Subcommittee on Capital Needs, and I think I'm missing one. But long story short is, you are able to present your bills in front of the committee. You have to get a majority of the committee to support it for it to go to the floor, and a decent amount of time. There's amendments that take place to make the bill better or to remove opposition. And one piece of information that I want to make sure you all are aware of is that you can file what's called witness slips online to make sure your voices are heard. So when there's a committee hearing, the committee chair, when a bill comes forward, he or she reads the witness slips to say these people are opposed, these people are for, and that's what the support level is, for your bill. But that's a way for constituents, for people to be involved in the process. So your bill passes through committee, then it goes to the floor, maybe it passes through the floor, and then it goes over to the other chamber. The other chamber has to do the same thing. Committee, floor, and then it goes. And then obviously if one chamber tweaks the bill or amends it, it has to go back to the initial chamber and be passed again there on what's called concurrence. And so it's hard. It's not easy because, when you have, for example, when you have opposition to a bill, there's a lot of lobbyists in Springfield, and they'll work to say, oh, okay, it passed out of the Senate, so we're going to stop it in the House, and vice versa. And that's why I tell people, they're like, oh, are you going to fight for this for me? And I said, you bet I am, but I need 30 votes in the Senate, 60 in the House, and the governor to sign. Those are three things that every bill needs. And so that's what makes this a hard process. And so you guys remember that 6,000 number I said, 599 bills passed through both chambers. So about 10% of the bills that were introduced passed through both chambers, and the governor signed, I believe he signed a majority of them, probably in the 500s. I don't know what the exact number is, but there's some bills that he probably vetoed or mandatory vetoed. And then so that's the next step, is once it's passed, both chambers, the chamber that the bill is initiated in has 30 days to send to the governor, and the governor has 60 days to sign it from there, or veto it, or mandatory veto it. And that takes us basically to the end of August. And then, that the summer and fall are really a discussion point of what issues we weren't able to address, or what we can do to make bills better. So people know that we passed recreational cannabis. By no means was this legislation perfect. People know that we passed the capital bill. It wasn't perfect. There are no. I argue there's no bill that was that's perfect. So we have to go back and fix things, and that's what veto session is typically used for. So we go in October for a week and November for a week, and we work on bills. They're called cleanup bills. They're called omnibus bills, to basically tweak some of the things that we've done to make them better. And then that takes us to the end of November. I have no idea if I've been following the slide.
Ron, the slide is just for reference for the attendees, not for you.
Got it.
We're sure you know the state government and how it functions.
Sometimes I question myself. So we talked about the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general. I describe as the consumer legal advocate for the state. Like, that person's there to essentially make sure that if people have, if like insurance companies are taking advantage of a person or utility company, whatever, they're your lawyer. Like they will, you know, not in all situations, but that's what we're working towards is they're there to make sure that they can represent you. Secretary of State, folks know that's basically the DMV operation that the state has. They also have quite a bit of licensing responsibilities, and you know, he can also do a really good headstand. I don't know. He's 84 and can do a better headstand than I can. The treasurer is basically invests the state money, so people get confused sometimes about treasurer and comptroller. So the treasurer invests the state dollars, the comptroller pays our bills. And there is a discussion, I don't know if it's healthy or not, about combining the two offices, but there's also the vantage point of keeping them separate because the person investing our money shouldn't necessarily be the person that's control of all of our bills. So there's a little give and take there. But these are all offices that are their own entity, if you will. Talk about the judicial branch. So just a comment, you know, we do talk to you know, the judges from time to time because it's helpful to have a conversation about you know, because they have comments on if laws are too ambiguous, because that makes their job harder. Because their job is to interpret the law, and if a law is very ambiguous, then they're kind of injecting themselves in their opinion in a way where they may not want to. So I should say this, during our orientation, 51 out of the 177 legislators in the Illinois General Assembly are new within the last 2 years. So about 30% or so. So we had a large orientation, and the Illinois Supreme Court Chief Justice spoke to us, and one of the things that he commented on and almost advised us was their job is to interpret the law. If we make ambiguous laws, it makes their job harder and may not lead to the outcome that we had in mind when we were trying to pass that bill. So I think that's an important point to make. Cool.
Yeah, sorry.
So I can stop there. Allie wrote me some notes and I didn't read any of them, so we'll cover that though. But yeah.
Is the capital bill the same as the capital plan?
Yes.
So could you please explain to the audience what you were able to do for our community through that capital plan?
I'm happy to, yeah. So let me start off by saying there's two parts to the capital plan. One is horizontal, which is considered roads, bridges, and mass transit, basically transportation and infrastructure. The other part is considered vertical, which means investments in our community, whether it's hospitals, schools, nonprofits, and so forth. I always start with this. In 2007, Minnesota had a bridge collapse. 7 people passed away, 145 were injured. The American Society of Civil Engineers have said that Illinois has a D- rating when it comes to transportation and infrastructure. We have 2,300 deficient bridges. I was in a capital hearing, a subcommittee on capital needs that I'm on, and an Illinois Department of Transportation official said this A bridge, ranking 1 to 9, 9 being the best, is ranked at 2. So I asked him, at what point do we shut down that bridge when it collapses? I asked him. So we raised the gas tax by 19 cents. It was 19 cents. We raised it another 19 cents. We haven't done that. We haven't changed the gas tax since 1990. We're about in the middle of the country with that raise. And because of the lockbox amendment that was passed in 2016, it has to all go towards roads, bridges, and mass transit. So that's where the money is dedicated. We also passed, and this is a good point that I can make, which is nothing happens in a vacuum. So we passed a gaming bill, and it was 6 new casinos. Chicago, Waukegan, Rockford, Danville, Walker's Bluff, and South Suburbs. Those are where the casinos are going. They expanded video gaming from, you can have 5, wherever municipalities agree to it, 5 to 6 machines and a max bet from 2 to 4, and then sports betting based off of the Supreme Court decision that states can do sports betting. I'm saying all that to say that's what funded the vertical portion of the capital bill. And the vertical portion, as I said, was those investments that we can make in communities. And so as part of that, I was able to secure $150,000 for the Assyrian-American Community Center, and I believe one other church. I always say it in that frame because it was all connected, right? Like the governor's office and the legislators didn't want to do horizontal without vertical because there's a lot of appetite to do horizontal because everyone was behind it, business, unions, everyone. But if we did horizontal and didn't do vertical, then vertical might never have happened. But in order to get vertical, we needed to do a gaming bill. And the gaming bill they've been trying to do a gaming bill for 20 years because the existing casinos don't want more casinos because that's competition. They don't want more video gaming, and they don't want sports betting. So and so it's just this it's almost a moving target, and so it had to be negotiated, and everything was kind of brought together. And I'll spare you some of the details, but we can go into it if you want. But the reality is, again, nothing happens in a vacuum.
Cool. Ron?
Yeah.
The witness slips that you mentioned, how do we submit those, and how many do you typically get? Like, is it enough of a sample to actually make an influence on the outcome of the bill, like on your voting decision? Like, if they're, I don't know, a million votes, you're getting 100 of those witness slips, like, do you really care, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. So first and foremost, I want to tell people 80% of the bills that we do down there are bipartisan and if not unanimous. No one knows that because the press covers the more controversial ones, which people can argue is appropriate, right? Like minimum wage, fair tax, cash tax, capital bill / capital bill, Reproductive Health Care Act. I mean, those are bills that are more emotionally charged in whether good or bad, whatever it is. And so I just want to point that out though, because I can go into a lot of different examples, but I've had bills where I've had 7 stakeholders and 6 of them are opposed for different reasons. And we sit down for like 8 hours and we negotiate and come up with language, and then everyone's on board, and then it passes 55-0, and then, but no one knows what went into that, and so it is what it is, but I just want to point that out, that we actually do work together really well. As far as the witness slips, there's a website, we can send it on. Atour and Denise definitely know about it. And I would say people do look at that. And so I'll just tell you what I would do. If I saw, Atour Sargon was opposed to a bill in committee, I would be like, oh, a constituent of mine is opposed. So I would, depending on when I would see it, usually you just see it right before the vote, so it's hard to, find out what she thinks, but I would call her afterwards and say, so at first I might say something like, I'll vote yes in committee, but I'm not sure if I can support this on the floor. Depending on who else is supporting it and opposed to it, it all depends.
But if I oppose it, he'll oppose it basically is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, that's right. No matter what anyone else, even if 16,999 people in my district are for it, if Atour says, but it really depends, and so it's a good indicator. Who typically does it is the bigger groups, right? So I'll get, for example, gun violence prevention.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The Illinois State Rifle Association is going to oppose gun violence prevention measures. The People for a Safer Society, Gun Violence Prevention PAC, Brady campaign, they're going to support it. So based on that, I'm on this category. You know, I believe we need more gun violence prevention measures. We can talk about how that looks. We can talk about amendments. We can talk about a lot of things. But I'm not, you know, going to be on that side. I just fundamentally don't believe that. But where you all come in is you really get to, first of all, the numbers are important, right? Like people, like if 2,000 people are for something and 500 people are against, people are going to be like, well, that's a big disparity. Like, so, okay. So the numbers are important. It's also like if you sign a witness that like eight state Senate district constituent, like that's going to make my eyes pop because that's who I care about ultimately, right? Like it's great that we have all these advocates and stakeholders and that's important in terms of giving us an indication of where people are at, but my constituents are who I care about, you know? So it does factor in. It's just, it's also the timing of everything, right? The bill is, it's okay. We have to have it. You know, bill is coming up right away. I try to some extent give colleagues the benefit of the doubt, especially on bills that I'm not an expert on or not like I have this fundamental passion for. But it does make a difference. It just depends on timing too. These you should
So
have.
yeah, I just want to say it's a really great tool. Witness lists are a really great tool for people to be able to voice their opinions on specific legislation. And I've done a lot of work in gun violence prevention laws in Illinois. And when I first started 6+ years ago, there would be, you know, a measure, for example, to promote gun safety. And the Illinois State Rifle Association and pro-gun advocates in Illinois would have hundreds of witness lists. And the gun violence prevention advocates, you know, the ones who wanted stricter gun laws would have maybe 30. So it would be 30 to 500 or 30 to 800. And now, after building, you know, a coalition of organizations that are all, you know, active around legislation for gun safety in Illinois, you know, I think gun dealer licensing got maybe over 5,000. Our side got over 5,000 witness lists, which is huge. And it really, you know, the legislators on those committees really took notice of how many people were actually chiming in with their opinions, residents from all over Illinois. And this is because, you know, we got together groups like Vote Assyrian who joined, you know, a coalition that works towards gun violence prevention specifically. And then there's a very specific time frame, though. I don't know if you want to mention this, that you can file a witness slip. It takes like 2 minutes. You just put in your name, address, information, and but you have to do it sometimes within a few days, and sometimes there's only a few hours. It's exactly when the bill posts, and before the bill is actually heard in committee. And so sometimes those bills are heard in committee are scheduled very quickly, and so, you know, we'll send out an alert and say, everyone please stop what you're doing now, take 2 minutes, file a witness slip, you know, to, for example, get a 72-hour waiting period for firearms purchase, for gun dealer licensing, some of these measures that are really going to be effective in helping keep our community safe. So anyway, that's just what I wanted to say, is that it's an extremely effective tool that can be applied across the board to every issue.
And it helps because it, again, like I said, there's a lot of lobbyists down there, and that's their job is to lobby, but ultimately everyone knows that we're accountable to our constituents. So hearing from them is really important.
Great.
Yeah.
Maybe if you can speak to Vote Assyrian and the impact our organization has had in working with different local officials and organizing and anything that you want to add.
Yeah. So I'll put it to you this way. I'm part of the Indo-American Democratic Organization, IADO. They started in 1980, and one of the founders was Ramsin Benjamin, and then it was Mayor Jane Byrne who said, they saw each other at a parade or something, and she said, come to my office tomorrow, I want to talk to you. so I said, okay, I'll come to your office. And basically, I think the conversation was, look, if you guys don't create an organization, you're not going to have a collective voice, and people aren't going to, respect you as a stakeholder. So you need to do it, and that's what they did. They started an Indo-American Democratic Organization. We're actually celebrating our 40th year. But I will tell you, since that point, I don't know all the numbers in front of me, but suffice to say, we've been able to elect, I would say, maybe 5 or 6 Asian Americans, different levels of government, and over 50, judicial folks over the years. And look, that matters, right? Like it's an opportunity. Atour can speak to it, but what I tell people is, when I look in the mirror in the morning, like, I'm Indian American, I'm Asian American, I'm a minority. So I'm going to go to do my job in that lens, And Atour does the same thing for the village of Lincolnwood and whatnot. And so it's incredibly important that, because otherwise you just have chaos. Each one of you go to your legislators and ask for something different. There's not a real, that legislator or elected official doesn't feel like there's a real community behind this request, behind this ask, behind this, a funding ask or whatever it is. But creating an organization like Vote Assyrian, you all are on the map. The Assyrian community is on the map now. Like, there's no question about it. And I think that people have begun to know. I think with the Atour's election, I think with the work that Ramsin and others have done to elect other candidates, people now have had this in their mind, like, oh, the Assyrian community is a community that we need to approach, we need to earn their support, we need to listen to their issues, and that's what it's all about, right? At the end of the day, so I'll tell you, one of the bills that people feel like there's not a disconnect. People feel there's a disconnect. What is, as someone from immigrant community or family, I've heard over and over from family and friends, like, what does that have to do with me? What does the government process have to do with me? What does the political process have to do with me? So I passed 12 bills through both chambers, but one bill in particular that I talk about is if in a civil procedure, if you go to court in a civil procedure, they cannot bring up your immigration status unless it's relevant. They used to be able to. Illinois is now the 3rd state that prohibits that. So what does that mean? That means if you're undocumented, a permanent resident, green card holder, whatever you are, and you're facing discrimination, wage theft, harassment, I can't speak, I don't want to speak for the Assyrian community, but a lot of the people in the Indian community, they're told, just put your head down, go to work from 9 to 5, don't create a ruckus, and everything will work out. That's kind of how some of the community is. And I say no, right? Like, if you face discrimination, you face harassment, you should feel comfortable seeking justice. Everyone should be. That's what this country should be about and is about. And so that's just one example of how, by having a conversation with immigrants, we could kind of introduce and pass a bill that'll fundamentally change people's lives. And I think that happens when, I'll just use our example, like if I hadn't gotten to know Vote Assyrian and the Assyrian community through Ramsin, Billy Asher, and other folks, I don't know that I would have allocated that $150,000 to the Assyrian Community Center, right? Like, I don't know. But it was through the educational experience of me visiting, them talking to me, them talking about the issues that are important, that we got that done, and that's so important. We have a Rohingya Muslim community center on Devon Avenue. There are 400 families here. They faced a genocide where they came from in Burma or Myanmar, and they invited me to their iftar, and they're like, yeah, we're looking at getting a community center. This was like May 24th, like 7 days before the session was over. I said, get me your information because I can try to help with the capital bill. And And the reality is, that's what I'm here for, that's what I want to be here for. That's also what state government should be about. It's helping people that, you know, I point to the Assyrian community, the Roman community, as people that have faced severe injustices in their history, and that's what we need to, those are the people that we need to help. So. I'm okay with no more questions too. All right. Hopefully that answers. All right. Thank you.
If I could just quickly say, we didn't get a ton of time to talk about what Assyrian and what we really do, and maybe we, oh, sorry. Maybe we'll have another opportunity to do that, or maybe we can just send around an email with some information. If anyone is interested, we'd be happy to talk about you. But thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you.